Hey everybody, this is Sheets, and we're going to be doing our lineup construction video where we focus in on building a portfolio of lineups specifically for the throwdown on DraftKings, the one that, has, what is it, 50,000 people, whatever it is. Um, and we're going to be using SaberSim. We're going to examine different techniques to get unique, different techniques to, generate upside and try to win that battle between finding lineups that are unique and finding lineups that actually have a chance to win. I mean, I could find you 150 unique lineups, no problem, with just all the underdogs leaving 12,000 on the table and whatever it is, but those aren't going to have a chance to win. And I could find you lineups that have a chance to win, um, but those are going to be rate to be very highly duped. So we have to kind of thread that needle somehow, using both our knowledge of the fights and tricks of the trade and a lot of technology to do our best to get as unique as possible without sacrificing, good lineups. And we picked a very, very difficult week to do it this time because number one, you have 11 fights after two of them dropped out, which is, that's hard enough to get unique with 11 fights. And the other issue is that you have basically a free square in DeSantos after the miss, after his previous opponent dropped out. He's now 8K as a 7-1 favorite. So he's going to be, theoretically he's a lock, but he's 70%, probably going to be 70% owned. So if you're going to want to play, a portfolio of lineups that have a chance to win the big prize or big enough prize, you got to be really careful by playing a guy that's going to be 70% owned. You have to figure out what you want to do with that. There are a couple of ways to attack a situation like this. One way is to choose to just lock him in and play 100% of him, but that's would be only the beginning. You would have to with all of those lineups get pretty different in a lot of different ways, whether it be forcing in low owned plays, whether it be intentionally leaving money on the table, whether it be doing kind of a weird 3-round fight stack, which normally I wouldn't do, but on a card like this, you might want to consider that. As a matter of fact, there was a fight that, boy, this is kind of annoying. The Tertios fight that got canceled, I was actually going to allocate about 10% of my exposure to double stacking that fight, which is not something I do that often in GPPs, but I thought that fight was particularly well suited for it because there was going to be I thought there was going to be a lot of reversals and wrestling and takedowns on both sides. In any case, if you play a play like the Santos, these are the types of techniques you have to gonna revert to if you want to try to win the big prize. Now, I'm not saying that you have to play that way. I mean, if you want to play lineups that have a good chance to win, I mean, I could tell you what to do. I mean, you play DeSantos, you play what's his name, Semmelsberger, I guess, and then you play Ramius. He's going to be a good play, and you could then get in probably one or two of between Malik and Julian Robertson, and you're kind of off to the races. As a matter of fact, I mean, we're not going to actually do that, but just to show you um, what that would look like. I mean, something like this. This one actually uses Mearshart. I mean, this is a great lineup, which you can't play. This lineup is going to be so heavily duped. It leaves, zero on the table, and it's got 70% owned of this guy. It's got Malik, who's going to be 65% owned. Jillian's going to be popular. Semmelsberg will be popular. I mean, like, all these guys are going to be great plays, and Mearshart's going to be the only one that's not 30% owned plus, and even he might be pretty popular at that price. So I can give you these types of good lineups, but that's not going to help with this particular tournament. So what do you do then? Like how do you deal with this? Well, first thing, we just upload our projections and let's just start by just building, 5,000 lineups just so we have something to work with. Um, uh, and we're going to see what happens when we sort by different rating systems. So, for example, if we build 5,000 lineups and we sort by MMA defaults, we have to see what we would get. And to remind everybody what MMA default is, it's a Sabre sim created ranking where if we dive into this MMA default, you see that it does prioritize the 99th percentile outcome of the lineup. And then it also dings it for ownership somewhat, but not that much by minus zero point 0.1. Okay. So it's sort of aggressive, but it's not exceedingly aggressive. And before I even look, I'm imagining that if we rate them by MMA default, I guess we would probably get 100% of Dos Santos, I guess. But let's just see. Yeah, we get 98% of Dos Santos, and then essentially all just everybody else pretty much spread out. One thing you will notice though is Semmelsberger, who I said would be very popular. When you rate it by MMA default, you get very, very little of him. And Mearsart, you get very little of him. As a matter of fact, the underdog you get the most of is one that's going to be very difficult to click, and that would be Neil Magny. I mean, I've heard some expert players suggest that um, they won't play any of Neil Magny just because they don't think he's going to win. Now, again, I could make that sound a little less trite, not that so much he's not going to win, it's because he's not going to win often enough. Um, so this is actually pretty surprising right off the bat that when I just run it and use MMA default, I am getting that much of Neil Magny. So what that means to me is that I should probably play a good amount of lineups with this setting because it is going to be uncomfortable. And if you had told me that, if I ran these lineups, I would be getting so much of Neil Magny and for that matter, Melissa Mullins. I mean, these are two fighters, which if I had to rank, without just looking of what fighter I'd want, these probably would be the two of the lowest five. And the fact that I'm getting to them in what's typically a non-aggressive, I mean, it's aggressive, not exceedingly so, ranking system is actually very promising to me. Um, so let's do something else. Let's instead of ranking them by MMA default, let's rate them by Sim Diversity 10. And before we see what that is, again, I like to surprise myself here. So Sim Diversity 10 is a little bit different. It talks about 100 times the sim optimals, and this is kind of hard to explain, but Jordan tried the other day with me, and basically it means is that it's taking the top performance in the optimal lineups of these sims, which is sort of aggressive. But then what it does is it doesn't give you that 99th percentile outcome as MMA default did. But then what it does is it dings it for ownership a little more, minus zero point 0.2 instead of minus zero point 0.1. So I don't know how to rate this system relative to MMA default, except anecdotally. Like anecdotally, it seems as though the sim diversity tends a little more passive, but let's just see what it would look like if we rated them by MMA Sim Diversity 10. I still think we'd probably get 100% of the Santos, but let's see what else we would get. Yeah, so we'd still get 100% the Santos, but now we're getting more of, I guess the best way to describe it is like kind of a good plays. You get Malik, Prates, Ramius, Radke. Now the top owned underdog is going to be Tricoli, and then you'll get Stamen 26%. Then you get a little more of Semmelsberger. So this looks like more of you know, a standard type build. and I do worry that if you played this, you would just get way too duped. And forget what this says, this dupe thing over here. That's not going to work. Okay. Like, there's no chance that this is going to be zero dupes. I mean, literally none. All right. Um, so if you're going to play again, I think most of the lineups in this set, you're going to have to do other stuff like leave money on the table or manually reduce the ownership a little bit more. But the problem with doing that is now you're messing with the formula. You know what I mean? Like it's already supposed to be dinging the lineups for ownership. And if you manually reduce the ownership by doing, like geo mean filtering or something like that, you're just messing with the formula. Now, again, if you want to do that, you just do a totally different build and sort by geo mean or product ownership or whatever. But I don't think, as I learn more about this, you want to do both. So I think that with this set and even with MMA default, I think what we're going to want to do is probably leave money on the table. And the good thing about this uh, is that when you look at the big favorites up here, like let's look at it this way, like Protests, let's do by salary. Protests, Gomes, DeRitter, Blackshear. Look at all these people that dropped out. Not even Blackshear, like these three, Robertson 9,200, Abdul 9,300, whatever. I don't think there's too much of a difference between any of these guys and say Protests as far as ceiling goes. So I think that what you're going to want to do for openers is make sure that you leave money on the table at least to eclipse Protests. So in other words, I mean, if you want to be really technical about this, you'd play Robertson and leave 400 on the table. You play Malik and leave 300 on the table. You'd play what's his name? Yeah, exactly. Gomes and leave 200 on the table. Because Prata is going to be very, very popular. And these other guys are going to be popular too. But I think that you could maybe trick the optimizer into giving into not tricking the optimizer. You are capitalizing on the fact that everybody else's optimizer will get to Protests in those lineups where you have that 400 extra to spend. Like, for example, like if you look at projections, Pratis is the highest projected player. So if there is 9,600 left, all the lineups are going to go to him. Okay. And I personally think that there's really very little difference between him and these other fighters, especially in wins, especially something like Malik, even Jillian Robertson. Um, you could even argue that Ramius has a very kind of similar upside than to Prates. So with someone like him, you could leave, say, 900 on the table in those lineups. Um, so there's a couple of ways you can do that. One is you go like step by step, and you can start with the Ramius lineups. And what you do is you will search for lineups after you do this that have protests but not Ramius already, and then you just swap out Ramius for protests in that lineup. Um, so what that'll do is leave that 900 on the table and keep the rest of the lineup the same, and you're going to get much lower ownership of on Ramius, for example, in a lineup like that than you otherwise would, because very few people are going to be playing it that way. And then you go right up the line and you do the same thing with, and this is kind of hard to do. I haven't really coded this yet, but you want to do the same thing with, say, Ritter. You put 9,100, and then you use Protest as kind of like your proxy for, who you want to replace. And then what you want to probably go back and do is get some Protest as well. But for Protest lineups, you really have to go kind of, off the wall. You're going to have to do something very, very aggressive with your Protest lineups. And with that, you could either again leave money on the table, um, or you can go what for that geo mean filtering business I mentioned before, where you could just force in low ownership, either by geo mean filtering, by product ownership or whatever. Or if you want to do it another way, what you can do is use this other method that I kind of created that you can create on your own as well. And I created my own metric I called Sheets Default. And what that does is if we look at the arrow here or whatever, that combines several of the things we talked about in the other metrics. You have this 99th percentile outcome, which has been emphasized, and you're taking 0.3 times ownership away. So this is actually the the most aggressive way you can play is to do this. Like, for example, if I were just going to play with Sheets default, I mean, check this out. I don't even know if you get any DeSantos yet. Well, actually, you get 1% DeSantos, because they really ding it for ownership here. So, what I think I would probably do is in the Prates lineups, for example, um, you could, insist on a Sheets default setting. The other thing you could do with the Sheets default setting, if you wanted to, is insist that in your Dos Santos lineups that are not gonna leave money on the table in the way I just described, then all of those you can make a rule, not make a rule, make sure you build only lineups in the Sheets default setting, where if you're gonna play what's his name? DeSantos, and you're not going to leave money on the table, then you are going to make sure you get extremely different and low owned with every other piece. Okay. Next thing I want to do is run the Sims and see what doing that would look like. And again, let's remind ourselves of what we're doing here. So the throwdown we already put in here 200 and what is this? 235, no, 23,529 entrants. It already saved all this data and it's running the contest sims to reflect, what lineups would perform best against those particular lineups. So let's just see what that would look like. Um, okay, let's just go autofill for a second. And let me just see. Let's just look at the knockout, not the knockout, the throwdown here. Okay. And actually we have to look at direct fill for this. Okay. So if we did this, well, that's sort of interesting, huh? Let's just try this one more time. I want to look at this by the Sims, not by Sheets default. And I think that I'm still looking at it by Sheets default, but let's just take a look. Okay, so wow, this is pretty intriguing actually, that when you run the Sims here, you don't get wow, you don't get much at all of Dos Santos. Um, so look at this, you're getting actually 37% Scroggins. That's very surprising. Oh, because it's listing by Sheets default. We got to list it by target contest ROI. All right, all right. That's what I figured. All right, so when you run the Sims, that's what I figured. You're going to get the normal type plays. So you're going to get 83% to Santos, and then pretty much something. You know what this reminds me of? This looks a lot like the Sim Diversity 10 settings. I mean, I guess 28% Segula looks a little aggressive, but overall, this looks more like those, play the best plays thing. And I believe that again, if you're going to use this setting, it's just not going to be good enough, to get you the uniqueness that you need to play this contest. So what you're going to have to do is again go back and leave money on the table in the ways that I described before. Let me give you one example, I guess, how we can do that. So let's start with, okay, what if we did, how do we find the protest lineups with, let's look at the Ramius lineups, okay? Let's see, by the way, let's see if we could do this and keep the ownership the same, okay? So we want to have exposure to all these guys in this way, but we want to kind of mess around with the combination of these guys. So let's see, we want to play Ramius. And what is he? He is, what's his price again? 8,700. So I want to leave 900 on the table. So let's see, first of all, we can just rebuild. So we can just make kind of a note that we want to have 74 lineups with Ramius, but we want those lineups to have no protests. Well, not I wouldn't say obviously, but um, yeah. So that's a question. Do I want to have them with no protests? No, not necessarily, but ones that I gotta look at it the other way. We got to look at the protest lineups that do not have Ramius, right? Because then I want to replace Ramius with protests, and then I want to make sure that I get 74 total. So let's first take a look. So how many do we do? So we don't want any then. We don't want any Ramius with protests. Hmm. How do we do this? I'm a little confused. Now, again, what we could always do, by the way, we could just leave 900 on the table, right? So let's do that. Let's see what that looks like. So let's just filter this, add new filter. Uh Salary less than 49 1, is that? Actually 49.2, right? Salary less than 49,200. And then we also don't want lineups with protests in this. We want lineups with Ramius, but with no protests for these purposes. Okay. So how many is this? How many are these? It doesn't really say, but we can see. Let's download these. So what we've done, we built lineups with the Sims, and then we're going to say we only want lineups that leave 900 on the table, and those are going to be with Romnius, but no protests. Because those lineups otherwise would have actually replaced the Romnius with protests. Okay, fair enough. Let's see how many of these we get. Let's see. Save to CSV. Let's see what this looks like. So actually, there are 38 lineups. That's pretty good. Okay. We said we wanted 74, right? So we're gonna have 38 lineups that fit this bill with Ramius. So how do we get the other 36? Well, the other 36 lineups with Ramius, they could end up organically once we do the same thing with the other fighters. So let's just leave these 38 and then we'll see what we end up with. So let's do the same thing as before, except we're going to do this. We're going to, instead of doing filters, leaving 900 on the table, let's do some with Muhammad Malik at 93. We'll leave 300 on the table. So let's go back to the filter here. We'll leave 49,000, less than 49,800. Okay. And now we're going to have not necessarily any Ramius, but we're going to have no protests and we're going to have Malik. Um, and oh, there. So it looks like we have 42 lineups like that. So let's save these. Save to CSV. Okay, and so we have 42 lineups like that and 38 lineups that we saved before. So now we have it looks like 80 lineups. So now let's do the same thing with Julian Robertson. And let's do it, let's be precise. So Julian Robertson's a little cheaper, so we got to leave a little more on the table with her. So for her to get up to protests, you got to leave at least 300 on the table. So we have to be, well, actually 400 on the table. So it's got to be less than 49.7. So let's change this to less than 49,700. And we're going to play not necessarily Abdul, but we're going to play Jillian Robertson with no protests. And that looks like 35 lineups. So let's download those. Okay. So that gets us now to 115 candidate lineups. Again, we don't necessarily have to play all these, but these are all kind of good. And then the last one do we want to deal with is, do we need to do this with Gomes? We did it with Malik, we did it with Ramius, we did it with Jillian. Do we need to also do this with Gomes? Probably not, because she's not going to be that popular anyway. But so we don't really need to do that. So we have 115 lineups at least to start off with. Get rid of this, get rid of this. And then what we're going to do is what we said we were going to do with Dos Santos in those lineups where you weren't leaving money on the table. Okay, I think in those lineups, we want to filter for Geomine in some way. And this is gonna not be very, it's not gonna be, it's not gonna be easy. Okay. Um, the other thing you could do is just leave money on the table with Dos Santos. And if you want to be safe, we could just go ahead and leave that max amount that we talked about, if to get from what's his name? Ramius up to Prates, so we leave 900 on the table. So what we could probably do is that. And again, I think that's a better idea than just just lowering ownership. Oops, pardon me if you lost my video there. So all lineups with Dos Santos that were not artificially leaving money on the table already, let's leave 900 on the table with all those. I think that's what you kind of have to do here. So let's go back to here and we will do less than 49,200. Boom. And then let's download these. And I do think it's better than going to straight sheets default. And then, oh, you have a lot of lineups like this. I have like 130. So we don't need that many. Oh, sorry about this. Again, the video is kind of screwed up. So we have 130 lineups that are candidate lineups that leave 900 on the table. Um, I think that we probably should do something with ownership as well. So I don't want to get too greedy, but let's set this as a geo mean thing where you want to at least maybe limit to 10 dupes. Now you're going to end up with more because you're already leaving 900 on the table. Um, so let's see, what does that mean? So with how many players did we say? I mean, how many entrants? 23,529. So geo mean 23,000 for 23,529. 6. 18.6 is asking for too much, but 5 dupes, 24.4 geo mean. So let's see if we can get that. Add new filter, geo mean less than 24.4. Let's see if we can get these. Yeah, okay. So only 107 total. Um, and you're looking at some pretty low ROI lineups. Like a lot of these are negative ROI lineups. Actually, your pool is only 2 from here. Very, very difficult to play this way. So let's again, that's why this geo mean filtering is very nasty. So let's get rid of that. And what we'll do is we'll just go back to um that group of, I guess, 130 that or 129 that left that money on the table. And let's see if we can do something different. What we can do is, again, see what happens when we rate them by sheets default instead. And remember, that was the really aggressive, right? So we go back to sheets default. And in that case, we could probably take out the requirement that we leave money on the table. So let's take that out. What just happened there? So we have no filters. So I think I might have just confused it a little bit. No, I think what this is saying is that if you want to rate it by sheets default, you really can't play Dos Santos at all. Then again, I do see 2,689 in here. Why should I not be able to play him? You know? Why am I only getting, oh, there is a pool of 2,689. Okay. Um, so we could save this. And how many are we looking for again? It still is just giving me the one. So I don't know. Oh, because of the entire pool. So why am I not getting them? All right. So it looks as though I'm kind of banging around SaberSim too much. So let's let's do this. We had 115 candidate lineups. Let's add 35 of these Dos Santos leaving money on the table lineups to that. And then we're going to see, and this is going to be something I don't do too often, but I want to see what we have. Okay. because these were all built sort of with designs of being at least close to unique, just by leaving money on the table and tricking the optimizer or whatever. And if you get like a reasonable distribution, I'll be very happy. But the first thing I want to do is I want to see if these lineups are duping themselves. Because again, it's very possible that the different screenings that I came up with are going to result in the same lineup emerging in several screens. So let's just make sure that that doesn't happen. So we have this dupe calculator over here that allows me to put a bunch of lineups in and see how many of them are repeated. Okay. So let's just make sure there's only 150 in there. Yep. And then remove duplicate lineups. And I mean, I have a feeling that this is going to work. Oh, so we have 18 dupes, which I like. That means we could do 18 other lineups, okay, using different screens. So this is actually cool. So let's let's go back into our Saber Sim and what other 18 lines, like what have we not tried yet? Well, we didn't try some lineups that just had Sheets default settings, okay, without locking in um anybody. Um and I think that's this group right here. Okay. This is Sheets default. We're not locking anybody in. So let's just use either the top 18 of these. So let's save this to CSV. And I'll show you what I'm doing after I do it actually. So I'm just cutting and pasting the top 18 lineups from that group into this dupe calculator again, just to see. Well, actually, could do a couple more, right? Hang on, let me just make sure. I'm missing like 5, so let's just let's do these. Um, 18. Okay. All right, so same thing. So let's now, again, let's go back here and let's remove the duplicate lineups. And then, okay, good. So we only have 2 dupes total here. So in total, we have 155 lineups. So we'll just take the top 155 or 150. And we'll put these in, and then we will actually see what that got us. Okay. Let's go to edit entries. And it's going to be a little bit misleading because we might get, raw ownership in someone who, oops, excuse me again. Video again kind of got lost. So we might have guys that we've heard of, the guys we want to play, but the way we combine them might end up being a little more unique than we would that we might have expected. So let's put 150 in here. Just so I have it, let me I'm gonna save this lineup to all my big buy-ins so I know what it is. We'll look at that in a minute, by the way. Oops. And then this save, and then we'll upload these, and then I want to see what I have. We'll do kind of, a sanity check, at least some degree. View exposures. Let's just see what we would get. All right. So DeSantos, we would get the most of. So we're getting the guys that we want, right? But what's neat is that we left money on the table. We kind of tricked the optimizers just a little bit. and we did play some lineups with this, Sheets default setting here. So we're the only guy that's kind of suffering is not surprisingly Protest because of all that substituting that we did. Um, so listen, you can't win everything and you can't play everybody. So if you want, you could go back and get some Protest lineups or whatever. But overall, I think this is a pretty decent, combination of, not going too crazy, yet giving yourself a shot, you know? And I'm actually pretty excited about this process actually. So that is going to do it. And again, I'm not telling anybody to play this way. I'm just showing you guys just different things to think about and different ways you can bang around SaberSim to you know, come up with some kind of process. And listen, mine's always work in progress. And every slate's different as far as what I like to do. So just share my thoughts with you as I kind of come up with them. As far as my big buy-ins, it's going to be some combination of those guys that I mentioned earlier. I don't usually get too different in those big buy-ins. All right, that's going to do it. 4 p.m. start tomorrow. Good luck, everybody.